The screams echoed across the Memphis Zoo on that sweltering Tuesday afternoon. But it wasn't the usual delighted shrieks of children watching the sea lions perform. These were screams of pure terror, the kind that made every parent within earshot drop their cotton candy and sprint toward the sound. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Dynamics, and one of the most feared negotiators in corporate America, had just plunged headfirst into the alligator habitat at the Memphis Zoo's newest exhibit, Bayou Adventures. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What happened next would change two lives forever in ways neither could have imagined. Because sometimes the most powerful connections are forged not in boardrooms or at charity galas, but in moments of absolute terror when one human being chooses to risk everything for a complete stranger. The day had started like any other for Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old former Marine who now worked as a wildlife conservation specialist. His 8-year-old daughter, Lily, had been buzzing with excitement all morning about their planned visit to see the new alligator exhibit, chattering endlessly about the American alligators that had recently been relocated from Louisiana after a hurricane had damaged their previous sanctuary. Marcus had promised her this outing for weeks, and despite his exhausting schedule managing wildlife rehabilitation programs across Tennessee, he never broke a promise to his daughter. Lily skipped alongside him as they approached the Bayou Adventures section of the zoo, her curly pigtails bouncing with each step and her zoo map clutched tightly in her small hands. She had been fascinated by reptiles since she could walk, much to the bewilderment of her late mother's family, who couldn't understand how their delicate little angel had developed such an intense interest in creatures that most people feared. But Marcus understood. Lily approached the world with the same fearless curiosity that had made her mother, Sarah, such an exceptional emergency room nurse before cancer claimed her 3 years ago. The Memphis Zoo had spared no expense on their new alligator habitat. The exhibit featured a sprawling pool system designed to mimic the Louisiana bayous, complete with cypress trees, Spanish moss, and murky water that perfectly replicated the natural environment where these ancient predators thrived. Elevated walkways allowed visitors to observe the alligators from multiple angles, with reinforced glass barriers and safety railings that met every conceivable safety standard. The crown jewel of the exhibit was an observation deck that extended partially over the main pool, giving visitors the sensation of standing directly above the alligators while remaining completely secure behind multiple layers of protection. Or so everyone believed. Victoria Sterling had not planned to be at the zoo that Tuesday. The 32-year-old CEO had built her reputation on meticulous planning and rigid schedules, transforming her family's struggling manufacturing company into a billion-dollar empire through sheer determination and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate market trends. But her assistant had made a critical error in scheduling, double booking her afternoon between a board meeting and a photo opportunity at the zoo's corporate donor event. When the board meeting ran long, Victoria found herself rushing across Memphis in the back of her Tesla, frantically reviewing donor appreciation talking points while her driver navigated traffic with the urgency of someone who understood that Victoria Sterling's time was worth approximately $2,000 per minute. The zoo's development director had been waiting anxiously for her arrival, knowing that Sterling Dynamics' recent $5 million donation was crucial for the completion of several conservation initiatives. Victoria arrived at the Bayou Adventures exhibit with her trademark efficiency, her designer heels clicking against the wooden walkways as she surveyed the impressive facility with the calculating eye of someone accustomed to evaluating investments. She carried herself with the poised confidence that had intimidated countless business rivals, her perfectly styled auburn hair catching the afternoon sunlight, and her navy blue suit impeccable despite the Memphis heat. The photo opportunity was meant to be simple and carefully choreographed. Victoria would pose beside the information plaque, highlighting Sterling Dynamics' contribution. Then perhaps take a few shots observing the alligators from the main viewing platform before departing for her next appointment. What nobody had noticed in the rush to arrange the perfect shot was that one section of the safety railing on the observation deck had been loosened during routine maintenance that morning. The work crew had been called away to handle an emergency with the elephant habitat before they could properly secure the railing, leaving behind what would soon become a catastrophic oversight. Marcus and Lily had arrived at the alligator exhibit just as the photo session was beginning. Lily pressed her face against the glass barrier of the main viewing area, her breath fogging the surface as she watched the massive reptiles gliding through the murky water with prehistoric grace. The largest of the alligators, a 14-foot male named Boudreaux, had positioned himself directly beneath the observation deck, his golden eyes scanning the surface with the patient intensity of an apex predator. The zoo photographer was positioning Victoria for the perfect shot when disaster struck. As she leaned slightly against what she assumed was a secure railing to achieve the desired angle, the loosened section gave way with a sharp crack that echoed across the exhibit. Time seemed to slow as Victoria's expression shifted from professional composure to absolute terror, her arms windmilling frantically as she realized she was falling toward the dark water below. The scream that escaped her throat was primal and desperate, cutting through the afternoon air like a blade. Visitors throughout the exhibit area turned toward the sound, their faces registering confusion that quickly transformed into horror as they understood what was happening. Children began crying, adults shouted warnings that came too late, and zoo staff members started running toward the scene with the frantic urgency of people who knew exactly how dangerous the situation had become. Victoria hit the water with a tremendous splash, her business suit immediately waterlogged and dragging her down into the murky depths of the alligator pool. The cold shock of the water temporarily paralyzed her, but terror provided its own adrenaline as she surfaced, gasping and disoriented in the center of a habitat designed to contain some of nature's most efficient predators. Boudreaux had immediately oriented toward the disturbance, his massive form cutting through the water with terrifying speed as his predatory instincts engaged. What happened next would be replayed in Marcus Thompson's mind for the rest of his life. Every detail burned into his memory with crystalline clarity. The way Victoria's hair fanned out across the dark water, the desperate sound of her breathing, as she tried to stay afloat while weighed down by her professional attire. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The ominous V-shaped wake that Boudreaux created as he approached his unexpected visitor. And most importantly, the split-second calculation that Marcus made as his marine training and wildlife expertise collided in a moment of absolute clarity. Marcus didn't hesitate. While zoo staff members were still processing the emergency and reaching for their radios, while other visitors stood frozen in shock and disbelief, Marcus was already moving. He vaulted over the first barrier with the fluid grace of someone whose body remembered countless obstacles courses and emergency situations. His military training had taught him to assess and respond to threats in milliseconds, and his work with dangerous wildlife had given him a deep understanding of predator behavior that most people would never possess. Lily watched in amazement and terror as her father launched himself over the second barrier and dove into the alligator pool without a moment's hesitation. The water exploded around his entry point as he surfaced immediately, his powerful strokes carrying him toward Victoria, with the speed and precision of someone who had trained for water rescues in conditions far more challenging than a zoo exhibit. But Marcus wasn't just relying on his swimming ability or his courage. What made everyone freeze, what sent a chill through every zoo employee who witnessed his actions, was the knowledge he demonstrated about alligator behavior that probably saved both their lives. Instead of creating more disturbance by thrashing toward Victoria directly, Marcus made a strategic decision that revealed his deep understanding of these ancient predators. He dove beneath the surface and approached Boudreaux from below and behind, positioning himself between the massive alligator and Victoria while using techniques he had learned during his specialized training in wildlife management. Marcus knew that alligators typically attack prey at the surface, and that their vision underwater was limited compared to their ability to detect movement and vibration from above. He also knew that Boudreaux, despite his size and power, could be confused and temporarily disoriented by an unexpected approach from his blind spot. What the horrified spectators witnessed was Marcus surfacing directly beside the 14-foot alligator, his hands making contact with Boudreaux's snout in a maneuver that looked suicidal to everyone watching, but was actually based on years of study and practical experience with dangerous reptiles. Marcus applied pressure to specific points around the alligator's jaw and eyes, using techniques that wildlife specialists employ to temporarily calm and disorient large reptiles during medical examinations or relocations. The effect was immediate and stunning. Boudreaux, instead of launching into the death roll that everyone expected, became momentarily still and confused, his primitive brain struggling to process this unprecedented situation. Marcus had bought them precious seconds, but he knew that his window of opportunity was measured in heartbeats rather than minutes. Victoria, meanwhile, was fighting her own battle against panic and exhaustion. The shock of the cold water had given way to the crushing realization of her situation, but she forced herself to remain as still as possible, some instinctive part of her mind recognizing that thrashing would only attract more attention from the predators surrounding her. She watched in amazement and terror as this stranger risked his life to create a barrier between her and death, his calm competence in the face of absolute danger unlike anything she had ever witnessed. Marcus wrapped one powerful arm around Victoria's waist, supporting her weight while maintaining his position between her and Boudreaux with movements that were both protective and strategically calculated. His voice, when he spoke to her, was steady and reassuring despite the life-threatening situation they faced together. "I need you to stay calm and let me guide us toward the edge," he said, his breath warm against her ear as he spoke quietly. "To avoid creating additional disturbance in the water, don't make any sudden movements and trust me completely. I know what I'm doing." Victoria nodded, her usual instinct to take charge and control situations completely overridden by the recognition that her survival depended entirely on this man's expertise. She had built her career on reading people instantly, on recognizing competence and authority in high-pressure situations, and everything about Marcus Thompson's demeanor told her that she was in the hands of someone who understood exactly how to navigate this nightmare. The journey to the edge of the pool took less than 2 minutes, but felt like an eternity to everyone watching. Marcus moved with deliberate, controlled strokes, maintaining his protective positioning, while gradually increasing the distance between them and Boudreaux. Other alligators in the exhibit had been drawn by the commotion, but Marcus's knowledge of their territorial behavior allowed him to navigate between them without triggering additional aggressive responses. Zoo staff members had finally mobilized into action, with several keepers positioning themselves around the pool's edge with emergency equipment while others worked to secure the area and evacuate visitors. The zoo's head veterinarian had arrived with tranquilizer equipment, but Marcus's successful management of the situation made intervention unnecessary. He had demonstrated a level of expertise with dangerous wildlife that impressed even the professional staff members who worked with these animals every day. As they reached the edge of the pool, Marcus positioned himself to lift Victoria out first, his hands steady and strong as he boosted her up to the waiting zoo staff members. His own exit from the water was swift and efficient, accomplished with the same controlled precision that had characterized every aspect of the rescue. As soon as his feet touched dry ground, he immediately turned his attention back to Victoria. his trained eye assessing her condition for signs of injury or shock. Victoria stood dripping and shaking on the wooden walkway, her expensive business attire ruined, and her perfectly styled hair hanging in wet tangles around her face. But she was alive, and the man who had saved her life stood beside her, equally soaked but radiating a calm competence that made the terror of the previous minutes seem almost surreal. Zoo staff members surrounded them with emergency blankets and medical attention, but Victoria's focus remained entirely on Marcus, her usual command of language temporarily abandoned in the face of overwhelming gratitude. Lily had watched the entire rescue with her hands pressed against the glass barrier, her young mind struggling to process the incredible bravery her father had just demonstrated. When Marcus finally turned toward her, she broke free from the zoo staff member who had been comforting her and ran into his arms, with the desperate relief of a child who had momentarily feared losing the most important person in her world. The aftermath of the rescue unfolded with the controlled chaos typical of emergency situations. Paramedics arrived to evaluate both Victoria and Marcus, though neither had sustained any physical injuries beyond minor scrapes and the shock of their ordeal. Zoo administrators conducted immediate interviews to understand how the safety failure had occurred, while maintenance crews worked frantically to secure the compromised railing that had caused the entire incident. Victoria, wrapped in an emergency blanket and surrounded by her assistant and security detail, who had arrived within minutes of the accident, found herself repeatedly glancing toward Marcus as he spoke with zoo officials and comforted his daughter. She watched him explain the rescue techniques he had employed, his calm professionalism helping to reassure everyone that the situation had been handled with appropriate expertise. His knowledge of alligator behavior, his quick assessment of the emergency, and his flawless execution of the rescue had prevented what could easily have been a tragedy. As the initial crisis management activities wound down, Victoria approached Marcus with the hesitant steps of someone unaccustomed to finding herself in another person's debt. Her usual confidence and authority, so carefully cultivated through years of high-stakes business negotiations, felt inadequate in the face of a debt that could never truly be repaid. "I don't know how to thank you," she said simply, her voice still slightly hoarse from the terror and pool water she had swallowed during the ordeal. "What you did was incredible. You saved my life." Marcus looked down at her with the same steady gaze that had reassured her in the water, his expression serious but kind. "I'm just glad you're okay," he replied. "Anyone with my training would have done the same thing." But Victoria shook her head, recognizing false modesty when she heard it. "No, they wouldn't have," she said firmly. "What you did required knowledge and courage that most people don't possess. The way you handled those alligators, the way you positioned yourself to protect me, the techniques you used, that wasn't just bravery, that was expertise." Lily tugged at her father's shirt, drawing both adults' attention down to her serious 8-year-old face. "Daddy knows everything about animals," she announced proudly. "He takes care of hurt ones and makes them better. And he's the strongest daddy in the whole world." Victoria smiled at the child's fierce pride in her father, recognizing in Lily's protective instincts a mirror of Marcus's own willingness to risk everything for someone else's safety. The family dynamic between father and daughter was evident. In every gesture and glance, speaking to a bond forged through shared experiences and mutual devotion. As they exchanged basic information and contact details, Victoria found herself studying Marcus Thompson with the same analytical intensity she typically reserved for potential business partners. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with the kind of solid, capable build that suggested both natural athleticism and disciplined maintenance. His dark hair showed traces of premature gray that she suspected came from stress rather than age, and his hands bore the calluses and small scars that spoke of someone who worked with dangerous animals on a regular basis. But it was his eyes that captured her attention most completely. They were a warm brown that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings, constantly assessing and analyzing with the hyper-awareness of someone trained to spot danger before it fully materialized. When he looked at his daughter, those eyes softened with unmistakable love and protectiveness. When he had looked at her in the water, they had projected steady confidence and absolute determination to keep her safe. Victoria Sterling was accustomed to being the most formidable person in any room, the one whose presence commanded immediate attention and respect. But standing beside Marcus Thompson in her soggy business suit, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the profound relief of knowing that someone else was competent enough to handle a crisis she couldn't control herself. The zoo's director approached their small group with obvious relief and gratitude, offering profuse apologies for the safety failure and ensuring that both Victoria and Marcus understood that the zoo would conduct a complete investigation into the incident. Victoria accepted the apologies with her typical grace, already shifting into the problem-solving mode that had made her such an effective CEO, but she noticed that Marcus seemed less interested in assigning blame than in ensuring that similar incidents would be prevented in the future. "The important thing is that everyone is safe," Marcus told the director. "But you might want to review your safety protocols for the observation areas. That railing failure could have been catastrophic if the circumstances had been different." Victoria watched him speak with the same calm authority he had demonstrated during the rescue, recognizing in his approach to crisis management a mindset that prioritized solutions over blame. It was a quality she had learned to value highly in her business dealings, where the ability to focus on fixing problems rather than punishing mistakes often determined the difference between success and failure. As the afternoon wore on and the immediate crisis management activities concluded, Victoria found herself reluctant to simply return to her normal routine and leave this extraordinary man and his daughter behind. The rescue had created a connection that felt too significant to dismiss with a simple exchange of thank you cards. Yet she struggled to find an appropriate way to express her gratitude or maintain contact without seeming inappropriate or presumptuous. Marcus seemed to understand her dilemma, approaching her as she prepared to leave with his daughter in tow. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice carrying the same steady confidence that had reassured her in the water. "Lily and I were planning to visit the zoo again next weekend to check on the alligators and make sure they're settling in well after all the commotion today. If you'd like to join us for a more peaceful visit, you're welcome to come along." The invitation was offered with casual friendliness, but Victoria detected an underlying sincerity that suggested Marcus understood the significance of what they had shared and wanted to provide an opportunity for both of them to process the experience in a less traumatic setting. She accepted immediately, surprising herself with her eagerness to spend more time with this remarkable man and his charming daughter. As they parted ways that afternoon, Victoria carrying Marcus's business card and a promise to meet the following Saturday, she found herself reflecting on the events with an intensity that went far beyond simple gratitude. The rescue had revealed aspects of courage and competence that she rarely encountered in her corporate environment, where intelligence and ruthlessness were valued more highly than physical bravery or genuine concern for others' welfare. But more than that, Marcus Thompson's actions had demonstrated a kind of selfless heroism that challenged her understanding of what truly mattered in life. She had spent years building an empire based on strategic thinking and calculated risks, always maintaining careful control over every variable she could influence. Watching someone risk everything for a stranger without a moment's hesitation or expectation of reward had shaken something fundamental in her worldview. That evening, as Victoria soaked in her marble bathtub, trying to wash away the lingering scent of alligator pool water, she found herself thinking not about the terror of falling into the exhibit or the relief of being rescued, but about the steady strength of Marcus's arm around her waist and the quiet confidence in his voice as he guided her to safety. For the first time in years, Victoria Sterling had encountered someone whose competence matched her own, but whose motivations seemed entirely different from anything she had previously understood about ambition and success. Meanwhile, across town in their modest apartment, Marcus tucked Lily into bed while she peppered him with excited questions about the day's adventure. She wanted to know everything about alligator behavior, about his rescue techniques, and most importantly, about the pretty lady who had fallen into the water and whether she was going to be okay. "She seemed very nice, Daddy," Lily observed with the straightforward honesty that Marcus cherished in his daughter. "And she was really grateful that you saved her. Do you think she'll really come to the zoo with us next weekend?" Marcus considered the question seriously, remembering the intensity in Victoria's eyes as she accepted his invitation and the way she had looked at him throughout the afternoon with something that went beyond simple gratitude. "I think she will, sweetheart," he said finally. "She seems like someone who keeps her promises." As he turned off Lily's bedroom light and settled into his own evening routine, Marcus found himself thinking about Victoria Sterling with curiosity and something approaching admiration. He had recognized her name immediately when they were introduced, of course. Sterling Dynamics was one of the largest employers in Memphis, and Victoria's reputation as a brilliant but demanding CEO was well known throughout the business community. But the woman he had rescued that afternoon had seemed different from the corporate powerhouse described in business magazines. Vulnerable, yes, but also grateful in a way that suggested genuine humility rather than the calculating charm he might have expected from someone in her position. Her acceptance of his invitation had been immediate and seemingly sincere, without the careful consideration of social obligations or business advantages that he would have anticipated from someone at her level of success and social prominence. Most intriguingly, Victoria had looked at him not with the mixture of gratitude and dismissal he had experienced from other wealthy individuals he had helped in various capacities, but with genuine interest and respect that suggested she recognized and valued the expertise he had demonstrated. It had been years since anyone outside his professional wildlife community had seemed to truly understand the knowledge and skill required for his work, and Victoria's obvious appreciation for his capabilities had been unexpectedly gratifying. As Marcus settled into sleep that night, he found himself looking forward to the following weekend with anticipation that went beyond simple courtesy or professional obligation. The rescue had created a connection between them that felt significant and worthy of exploration, and he was curious to learn more about the woman whose life he had saved, and who had responded to the crisis with such grace and genuine appreciation. Neither Victoria nor Marcus could have predicted that their chance encounter at the alligator exhibit would prove to be the beginning of something that would transform both their lives in ways they had never imagined possible. The rescue had been dramatic and life-changing in its immediate impact, but it was merely the first chapter in a story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about courage, success, and what it truly meant to find someone worth risking everything to protect. The following Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made Memphis feel almost magical. Victoria Sterling stood before her walk-in closet at 7 in the morning, staring at rows of power suits and designer dresses with the bewildered expression of someone facing an entirely unfamiliar challenge. What had one wear to a casual zoo visit with a wildlife specialist and his 8-year-old daughter? Her usual armor of perfectly tailored business attire felt absurdly inappropriate, yet she owned virtually nothing that qualified as casual weekend wear. After an embarrassing amount of deliberation, Victoria settled on dark jeans that still bore their original tags and a cream-colored cashmere sweater that represented her idea of dressing down. She added comfortable walking shoes, feeling oddly vulnerable without the confidence boost of her usual 4-inch heels. As she caught sight of herself in the mirror, Victoria realized she couldn't remember the last time she had dressed for an occasion that had nothing to do with business networking or corporate obligations. The drive to the zoo gave her time to question the wisdom of this outing. Victoria had spent the week replaying the rescue in her mind, analyzing her own reactions and trying to understand why Marcus Thompson's invitation had felt so immediately compelling. She was accustomed to compartmentalizing traumatic experiences, filing them away as learning opportunities rather than dwelling on emotional responses. But something about the quiet strength Marcus had demonstrated continued to occupy her thoughts in ways that felt both unfamiliar and unsettling. Marcus had arrived early at the zoo with Lily, who had been vibrating with excitement since dawn about their return visit. She clutched a small notebook and pencil, having appointed herself as the official documenter of alligator behavior for what she called their scientific expedition. Her father watched her with the patient amusement of someone accustomed to his daughter's intense enthusiasms, but he found himself checking his watch more frequently than usual as they waited for Victoria's arrival. The truth was that Marcus had spent considerable time during the week thinking about their upcoming meeting. He had rescued people before in various capacities throughout his military service and wildlife work, but none of those experiences had left him with the lingering curiosity he felt about Victoria Sterling. There had been something in her response to the crisis that went beyond simple gratitude, a recognition and appreciation for his expertise that suggested depths he hadn't expected from someone with her corporate reputation. When Victoria appeared at the zoo entrance precisely on time, Marcus felt a moment of surprised appreciation for her transformation from the polished executive he had first encountered. The casual clothing softened her appearance without diminishing the natural authority she carried, and her auburn hair caught the morning sunlight in a way that made her seem more approachable and genuinely beautiful rather than simply impeccably styled. Lily spotted Victoria immediately and bounded toward her with the unguarded enthusiasm that Marcus both treasured and occasionally worried about in his socially fearless daughter. "Miss Victoria, you came. Did you have nightmares about the alligators? Daddy says sometimes people have bad dreams after scary things happen, but I told him you were probably too brave for nightmares." Victoria knelt to Lily's eye level with a grace that surprised Marcus, accepting the child's enthusiastic hug with warmth that seemed entirely genuine. "I did have a few dreams about alligators," she admitted with mock seriousness. "But in all of them, your daddy was there to keep me safe, so they weren't really scary dreams." The response delighted Lily while creating an unexpected moment of connection between the two adults. Marcus found himself studying Victoria's face as she interacted with his daughter, noting the way her usual composed expression relaxed into something more natural and unguarded when focused on the child's innocent questions and observations. They spent the morning exploring sections of the zoo that Marcus knew would fascinate Lily while giving Victoria a chance to experience the facility from a visitor's perspective, rather than as a corporate donor making an obligatory appearance. Marcus proved to be an exceptional guide, his professional knowledge allowing him to provide insights about animal behavior and conservation efforts that went far beyond the standard informational plaques. At the primate exhibit, he explained the complex social dynamics of the gorilla family with the kind of detailed understanding that came from years of studying animal behavior in both captivity and natural settings. Victoria found herself genuinely engaged by his explanations, asking questions that revealed both intellectual curiosity and a growing appreciation for the complexity of wildlife management. "Most people think zoos are just entertainment," Marcus said as they watched a young gorilla navigate the intricate hierarchy of his family group. "But places like this are actually crucial research centers and breeding facilities for endangered species. That little guy there represents years of careful genetic planning to maintain healthy populations." Victoria observed the gorilla family with new understanding, recognizing parallels between their social structure and some of the organizational dynamics she managed in her corporate environment. "It's remarkable how much planning and expertise goes into creating these environments," she said. "I had no idea the scientific complexity involved." Lily had been busy documenting their observations in her notebook, her tongue poking out slightly. in concentration as she attempted to capture both factual information and her own impressions of each animal encounter. When they finally approached the alligator exhibit, she grabbed both adults' hands with sudden nervousness, as if only now fully comprehending the danger that had threatened them the previous week. The Bayou Adventures exhibit looked entirely different from Victoria's current perspective. The safety railings had been reinforced and additional barriers installed, but more significantly, she was experiencing the space as an interested observer rather than as someone who had nearly become part of the ecosystem. The alligators glided through their habitat with the same prehistoric grace that had both fascinated and terrified her during the rescue, but now she could appreciate their remarkable adaptation and survival instincts rather than simply fearing their predatory capabilities. Boudreaux, the massive male who had been her primary threat during the incident, was basking on a partially submerged log near the center of the pool. Marcus pointed him out to Lily and Victoria, explaining the alligator's behavior and the territorial dynamics that influenced his positioning within the exhibit. "He's actually a remarkable specimen," Marcus said with professional admiration. 14 feet of perfectly evolved predator. The way he responded to the disturbance last week was completely normal alligator behavior. He wasn't being aggressive or malicious, just following millions of years of instinctual programming. Victoria studied Boudreaux with fascination rather than fear, beginning to understand the difference between respecting a dangerous animal and being paralyzed by terror of it. "How did you know exactly how to handle him during the rescue?" she asked. "The techniques you used seemed so specific and calculated." Marcus's expression grew serious as he considered his response, weighing how much technical detail would be appropriate for a casual conversation. "Alligators have very specific behavioral patterns and physiological responses that wildlife specialists learn to recognize and work with," he explained. "What I did wasn't really controlling him so much as temporarily confusing his sensory input and taking advantage of his natural hesitation when confronted with unexpected stimuli." He went on to describe the specialized training required for his work, the years of study and practical experience that had prepared him to handle dangerous wildlife in emergency situations. Victoria listened with growing appreciation for the depth of knowledge and skill that Marcus's job required, recognizing expertise that was every bit as sophisticated as anything she had encountered in her corporate environment. As they moved away from the alligator exhibit, Lily announced that she was hungry and requested permission to visit the zoo's snack area. The request provided an opportunity for the three of them to sit together in a more relaxed setting, sharing pretzels and lemonade while Lily regaled Victoria with detailed accounts of various animals they had observed throughout the morning. Victoria found herself charmed by the child's enthusiasm and impressed by her genuine knowledge of wildlife facts. It became clear that Lily had inherited both her father's intellectual curiosity and his genuine love for animals, making her an engaging conversationalist despite her age. More importantly, Victoria began to understand the profound bond between father and daughter, recognizing in their interactions a partnership built on mutual respect and shared interests. "Daddy teaches me about animals all the time," Lily explained as she carefully documented a squirrel that had approached their table hoping for pretzel crumbs. "He says understanding animals helps you understand people too, because everybody has instincts and behaviors that make sense if you know what to look for." The observation struck Victoria as remarkably sophisticated for an 8-year-old, but she could see how growing up with Marcus as a father would naturally lead to such insights. She glanced at Marcus, who was watching his daughter with obvious pride and affection, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine admiration for someone else's parenting abilities and family dynamics. During a lull in Lily's animated descriptions of the morning's observations, Victoria found herself sharing more about her own background than she had initially intended. She described the pressures of running Sterling Dynamics, the constant decision-making and problem-solving that filled her days, and her growing realization that she had somehow constructed a life that left little room for the kind of simple pleasures they were enjoying at the zoo. "I can't remember the last time I spent a morning just observing and learning about something completely unrelated to business," she admitted with surprising honesty. "It's been incredibly refreshing to see the world through both of your perspectives." Marcus studied her thoughtfully, recognizing in her admission a vulnerability that contradicted her reputation for ruthless efficiency and emotional detachment. "Success can be isolating," he said quietly. "I've seen it in my work with conservation organizations. People who achieve extraordinary things in narrow areas sometimes find it difficult to maintain connections outside their expertise." The observation was offered without judgment, but Victoria felt the truth of it resonate uncomfortably. She had built her career on being indispensable and irreplaceable, but the cost had been relationships and experiences that now seemed far more valuable than she had previously recognized. Watching Marcus navigate his role as both a devoted father and accomplished professional suggested possibilities for integration that she had never considered. As the afternoon progressed, their conversation shifted toward more personal territory. Victoria learned about Marcus's military background and the career transition that had brought him into wildlife conservation. He had served as a reconnaissance specialist, developing skills in observation and analysis that translated naturally to animal behavior research. His decision to leave the military had been prompted by his wife, Sarah's cancer diagnosis, and his desire to be present for both her treatment and Lily's early childhood. Sarah was an emergency room nurse, Marcus explained as they walked toward the zoo's conservation center, where he had arranged a behind-the-scenes tour. She understood better than anyone the importance of being there for the people you love when they need you most. "When she got sick, my military career suddenly seemed far less important than making sure she and Lily had everything they needed." The quiet devotion in his voice when he spoke about his late wife impressed Victoria deeply. She had encountered many successful men who spoke about their families as obligations or accessories to their careers, but Marcus clearly viewed his relationships as the foundation that gave meaning to his professional achievements. It was a perspective that challenged many of Victoria's assumptions about success and priorities. Lily had been listening to her father's story with the solemn attention of a child who understood that she was hearing important family history. When Marcus finished describing Sarah's illness and death, she slipped her small hand into Victoria's with surprising intimacy. "Mommy was the best nurse in the whole hospital," she said with fierce pride. "She helped people get better, just like Daddy helps animals get better. That's why I want to be a doctor when I grow up, so I can help people and animals." Victoria felt touched by the child's trust and moved by the legacy of service that both her parents had created. The family's commitment to helping others, whether human or animal, represented values that had somehow been absent from Victoria's own upbringing and career development. She squeezed Lily's hand gently, feeling honored to be included in such an intimate conversation. The behind-the-scenes tour of the Conservation Center revealed another dimension of Marcus's expertise. He moved through the facility with obvious familiarity, greeting staff members who clearly respected his knowledge and valued his contributions to their programs. Victoria watched him examine animals undergoing rehabilitation, offering insights and suggestions that were received with professional appreciation. In one enclosure, they observed a young hawk recovering from a wing injury that would have been fatal in the wild. Marcus explained the complex medical and behavioral interventions required to prepare the bird for eventual release, describing the months of patient work involved in successful wildlife rehabilitation. His hands were gentle but confident as he demonstrated examination techniques for Victoria and Lily, showing them how to assess the hawk's progress without causing additional stress. The goal is always to minimize human contact while maximizing the animal's chances for successful return to its natural environment, he explained. Every interaction has to be purposeful and carefully considered to avoid creating dependencies that would prevent eventual release. Victoria found herself fascinated by the delicate balance required in Marcus's work, recognizing parallels to organizational management challenges she faced in her own career. The strategic thinking required to achieve long-term success while managing immediate needs resonated with her business experience. But Marcus's work carried additional complexity because his clients couldn't communicate their needs or preferences directly. As they concluded the Conservation Center tour, Victoria realized that she had learned more about wildlife biology and animal behavior in a single afternoon than she had absorbed in her entire previous education. More significantly, she had gained insight into a way of thinking about problems and solutions that emphasized patience, observation, and respect for natural systems rather than the aggressive intervention strategies that characterize her corporate environment. The drive home provided Victoria with time to reflect on the day's experiences. She had expected the zoo visit to be a pleasant diversion, an opportunity to express gratitude while spending time with an interesting man and his charming daughter. Instead, she found herself questioning fundamental assumptions about success, happiness, and the priorities that should guide important life decisions. Marcus's combination of intellectual capability, practical competence, and genuine devotion to his daughter represented a model of achievement that Victoria had never seriously considered. He had clearly made professional sacrifices to prioritize family relationships, yet he seemed more fulfilled and genuinely content than many of the corporate executives she knew who had achieved far greater financial success. That evening, Victoria sat in her pristine downtown penthouse apartment, surrounded by the trappings of material success, yet feeling oddly empty after the warmth and connection she had experienced with the Thompson family. The expensive furniture and carefully curated art collection that had once provided satisfaction now seemed cold and impersonal compared to the genuine affection and shared purpose she had witnessed between Marcus and Lily. For the first time in years, Victoria Sterling found herself questioning whether the life she had constructed was actually the life she wanted to live. The zoo visit had revealed possibilities for connection and meaning that her relentless focus on professional achievement had precluded, and she struggled to understand how she might begin to integrate these new perspectives into her existing circumstances. Meanwhile, Marcus was helping Lily organize her notebook full of observations from their zoo expedition, listening to her excited plans for their next animal watching adventure, while privately reflecting on his own reactions to the day. Victoria's genuine interest in his work and her natural rapport with Lily had impressed him in ways that went beyond simple gratitude for her attention to his daughter. He had encountered many successful people through his conservation work, donors and board members who supported wildlife programs for various personal and professional reasons. But Victoria's engagement had seemed different, more authentic, and personally motivated than the polite interest he typically received from corporate supporters. More intriguingly, he had glimpsed moments throughout the day when Victoria's carefully maintained professional composure had relaxed to reveal someone more vulnerable and genuinely curious than her public reputation suggested. Her questions about his work had demonstrated real intellectual engagement, and her interactions with Lily had shown a capacity for warmth and connection that contradicted her image as a cold and calculating executive. As he tucked Lily into bed that night, she peppered him with questions about Victoria and whether they would see her again soon. Her obvious affection for their new friend pleased Marcus, partly because Lily was typically cautious about forming attachments to adults outside their immediate family circle, but primarily because he trusted his daughter's instinctive judgment about people's character. "I really like Miss Victoria, Daddy," Lily announced as he turned off her bedroom light. "She listens when I talk, and she asks good questions about the animals. Most grown-ups just pretend to be interested, but she really wanted to learn about everything." Marcus kissed his daughter's forehead, recognizing in her observation the same authenticity that had impressed him throughout the day. "She is pretty special, sweetheart," he agreed. "I'm glad you enjoyed spending time with her." As he settled into his own evening routine, Marcus found himself looking forward to future opportunities to spend time with Victoria Sterling. The day had revealed aspects of her character that intrigued him professionally and attracted him personally, and he sensed that their connection had the potential to develop into something meaningful for all three of them. Neither Victoria nor Marcus realized that their growing attraction and mutual respect were about to be complicated by a discovery that would connect their lives in ways that went far beyond the dramatic circumstances of their first meeting. The foundation for their relationship had been established through genuine admiration and shared values, but the next phase of their story would test whether those positive feelings could survive revelations about their interconnected professional histories. The seeds of future conflict had already been planted, waiting only for the right circumstances to force both Victoria and Marcus to confront the complex realities that would challenge everything they thought they knew about each other and the possibilities for their future together. But for now, they both fell asleep that night with the rare satisfaction of having spent time with someone who seemed to understand and appreciate the aspects of their personalities that they valued most highly in themselves. Victoria Sterling stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on Monday morning, her usual commanding view of downtown Memphis somehow failing to provide its customary sense of accomplishment and control. The weekend at the zoo had left her feeling unsettled in ways she couldn't quite articulate, as if someone had adjusted the lens through which she viewed her carefully constructed world. Her assistant knocked softly before entering with the morning's priority items, but Victoria found her attention drifting from quarterly reports to memories of Marcus, explaining alligator behavior with passionate expertise while Lily took notes. In her small spiral notebook, the disruption to Victoria's typical Monday routine deepened when her head of legal affairs, Patricia Hayes, arrived for their weekly briefing carrying a thick folder with the kind of expression that usually preceded expensive complications. Patricia had been with Sterling Dynamics since its early days, serving as both legal counsel and Victoria's most trusted advisor on matters requiring delicate handling. "We need to discuss the Riverside Wildlife Sanctuary situation," Patricia said without preamble, settling into the chair across from Victoria's massive mahogany desk. "The Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation is requiring additional environmental impact studies before approving our expansion into the Collierville facility, and they've recommended a specific consultant for the assessment." Victoria accepted the folder with the mild irritation she typically felt when bureaucratic obstacles threatened to delay carefully planned projects. The Collierville expansion represented Sterling Dynamics' move into green manufacturing technologies, a strategic pivot that would position the company as a leader in sustainable industrial processes. The timeline was crucial for maintaining their competitive advantage in emerging markets. "What kind of delays are we looking at?" Victoria asked, flipping through pages of regulatory requirements and procedural documentation. "And how reliable is this recommended consultant?" Patricia's expression grew more complex, suggesting complications beyond simple scheduling conflicts. "That's where things get interesting," she said carefully. "The consultant they're recommending is Marcus Thompson, who runs Thompson Wildlife Conservation Services. Apparently, he's considered one of the foremost experts in Tennessee on habitat preservation and species impact assessment for industrial development." Victoria's fingers stilled on the documents as the name registered fully. Marcus Thompson. The same Marcus Thompson who had risked his life to save her from alligator-infested waters, who had spent Saturday patiently explaining wildlife behavior while his daughter documented their observations, who had made her question fundamental assumptions about success and fulfillment. The coincidence seemed too remarkable to be accidental. Yet Patricia's matter-of-fact tone suggested she had no knowledge of Victoria's personal connection to the recommended consultant. "You know him?" Patricia asked, noting Victoria's sudden stillness and the subtle shift in her expression. Victoria considered her response carefully, aware that her next words would determine how much of her personal life became entangled with this business situation. The smart corporate decision would be to disclose her acquaintance with Marcus and allow Patricia to handle the consultant selection process with full information. But something about the possibility of working with Marcus professionally intrigued her in ways that went beyond simple business considerations. "I've met him," Victoria said finally, choosing honesty without elaboration. "He seems extremely knowledgeable about wildlife conservation. What exactly would his assessment involve?" Over the next hour, Patricia outlined the scope of the environmental impact study that would be required for the Collierville project. The assessment would examine how Sterling Dynamics' proposed manufacturing facility might affect local wildlife, habitats, water systems, and endangered species populations in the area. The consultant would need to spend several weeks conducting field research, followed by months of analysis and report preparation that would ultimately determine whether the project could proceed as planned. The work required exactly the kind of expertise that Marcus had demonstrated during their zoo visit, combining scientific knowledge with practical field experience and the ability to communicate complex ecological concepts to non-specialists. Victoria found herself genuinely curious about how Marcus would approach such a comprehensive evaluation, recognizing parallels between his wildlife work and the strategic analysis that formed the foundation of her own professional success. More significantly, the consultation would provide legitimate opportunities for them to spend time together in a professional context, allowing their personal relationship to develop naturally while pursuing shared objectives. Victoria had been uncertain about how to maintain contact with Marcus without appearing overly forward or presumptuous, but this business connection would create a framework for regular interaction that felt appropriate and purposeful. "I'd like to meet with Thompson personally before we make any final decisions," Victoria told Patricia. "Set up a consultation for later this week. I want to understand his approach and make sure his recommendations will be practical for our timeline and objectives." Patricia nodded, making notes about scheduling and logistics while privately wondering about Victoria's unusual level of personal interest in a routine consultant selection. In her years of working with Victoria, she had rarely seen her become directly involved in contractor evaluations, unless the stakes were extraordinarily high or the vendor presented unusual strategic importance. The meeting was arranged for Thursday afternoon at Sterling Dynamics headquarters, with Marcus scheduled to tour the proposed Collierville site beforehand to familiarize himself with the project scope. Victoria found herself anticipating the appointment with an excitement that went far beyond normal business enthusiasm, spending an embarrassing amount of time selecting her outfit and reviewing Marcus's professional credentials with the kind of attention to detail she typically reserved for major merger negotiations. Marcus Thompson Wildlife Conservation Services turned out to be a remarkably impressive operation despite its modest size. Victoria's research revealed that Marcus had built a reputation as one of the Southeast's most respected wildlife consultants, with a client list that included federal agencies, major corporations, and environmental organizations. His military background had provided analytical skills that translated perfectly to complex environmental assessments, while his hands-on experience with dangerous wildlife gave him credibility that purely academic consultants often lacked. Most intriguingly, Marcus's approach to environmental consulting emphasized collaboration rather than confrontation, working with developers to find solutions that protected wildlife while allowing projects to proceed in modified forms. This philosophy aligned perfectly with Victoria's preference for win-win outcomes that advanced business objectives while addressing legitimate concerns from stakeholders and regulatory agencies. Thursday morning found Marcus driving toward the Collierville site with Lily beside him, her school having a teacher training day that left her free to accompany him on what she called his detective work for animals. She had packed her observation notebook and a small pair of binoculars, fully prepared to assist with the preliminary site assessment that would inform his afternoon meeting with Victoria Sterling. The coincidence of being asked to consult for Sterling Dynamics had surprised Marcus considerably. He was aware of Victoria's role as CEO, of course, but he had assumed their personal acquaintance would preclude any professional relationship. Business ethics typically discourage such overlapping connections, and Marcus had been prepared to recommend alternative consultants who could provide objective assessments without potential conflicts of interest. But Patricia Hayes had specifically requested Marcus's involvement, citing his unique qualifications for the particular environmental challenges presented by the Collierville project. The site bordered several critical wildlife corridors and contained wetland areas that provided habitat for species of conservation concern. Marcus's combination of practical field experience and proven ability to work constructively with industrial clients made him the obvious choice for a consultation that required both scientific rigor and business pragmatism. The Collierville site proved to be even more environmentally complex than the preliminary reports had suggested. Marcus spent the morning conducting a thorough survey of the property, documenting water features, vegetation patterns, and evidence of wildlife activity, while Lily helped by recording GPS coordinates and sketching notable geographic features. In her notebook, the proposed manufacturing facility would occupy approximately 40 acres of a larger tract that included both developed agricultural land and transitional forest habitat. The challenge would be designing the industrial complex to minimize disruption to wildlife movement patterns, while maintaining the operational efficiency that Sterling Dynamics required for their green manufacturing processes. "Daddy, look at this," Lily called from a small wetland area near the property's eastern boundary. She had discovered a series of tracks in the mud that Marcus immediately recognized as belonging to a family of river otters, an indicator species whose presence suggested healthy aquatic ecosystems. Marcus knelt beside his daughter to examine the tracks more closely, feeling the familiar satisfaction of discovering evidence that would be crucial to his environmental assessment. The otter family's use of this wetland area would need to be carefully considered in any development plans, but their presence also indicated ecological resilience that might support creative solutions for habitat preservation alongside industrial development. By the time they drove towards Sterling Dynamics headquarters for his afternoon appointment, Marcus had developed preliminary ideas for how the Collierville project might proceed with minimal environmental impact. The key would be convincing Victoria and her development team to embrace modified designs that worked with natural systems rather than simply imposing industrial infrastructure without regard for existing ecosystems. Victoria's executive assistant escorted Marcus and Lily to the 42nd floor conference room that Victoria had reserved for their meeting. The space commanded spectacular views of the Mississippi River and downtown Memphis, providing a dramatic backdrop for discussions about balancing industrial development with environmental protection. When Victoria entered the conference room, Marcus felt the same jolt of attraction he had experienced during their zoo visit, but now complicated by the professional context that demanded objectivity and clear boundaries. She moved with her characteristic confidence and authority, yet he detected subtle signs of nervousness that suggested their personal connection was affecting her as well. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for agreeing to consult on this project," Victoria said, extending her hand with professional formality that contrasted with the warmth in her eyes. "I understand you've already conducted a preliminary site assessment." Lily bounced up from her chair with typical 8-year-old enthusiasm, apparently unconcerned by the corporate setting or the formal tone of the adult conversation. "Miss Victoria, Daddy found otter tracks in 3 different kinds of hawk nests and a whole family of deer paths. This is going to be the best environmental detective work ever." Victoria's professional composure softened into genuine delight at Lily's excitement, reinforcing Marcus's growing appreciation for her ability to connect authentically with his daughter despite their vastly different backgrounds and life experiences. "That sounds like fascinating detective work indeed," Victoria replied seriously. "I'd love to hear about all of your discoveries." Over the next 2 hours, Marcus presented his preliminary findings and initial recommendations for the Collierville project. His assessment was thorough and scientifically rigorous, but presented in language that made complex ecological concepts accessible to non-specialists. Most importantly, his approach emphasized opportunities rather than obstacles, demonstrating how environmental protection could be integrated with industrial development to create outcomes that benefited both business objectives and wildlife conservation. Victoria found herself genuinely impressed by Marcus's professionalism and expertise. His recommendations were practical and innovative, suggesting modifications to the proposed facility design that would actually enhance operational efficiency while protecting critical wildlife habitats. Rather than simply identifying problems, he offered creative solutions that reflected deep understanding of both environmental science and industrial engineering. "Your proposal for the constructed wetlands is particularly intriguing," Victoria sighed, studying the detailed sketches Marcus had prepared, showing how stormwater management systems could double as wildlife habitat. "This could actually improve our sustainability metrics while reducing long-term maintenance costs." Marcus nodded enthusiastically, encouraged by Victoria's receptiveness to unconventional approaches. "The key is designing systems that serve multiple functions simultaneously," he explained. "Industrial facilities don't have to be environmental liabilities. With proper planning, they can actually enhance local ecosystems while meeting production requirements." Lily had been listening to the technical discussion with surprising attention, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated her growing understanding of environmental science concepts. When Marcus described plans for wildlife corridors that would allow animal movement through the developed area, she suggested additional features that revealed sophisticated thinking about habitat connectivity and species needs. "What if you made the corridors wider near the water areas?" she proposed, consulting her notebook of morning observations. The deer tracks were really spread out near the creek, like they wanted more space to be safe while they drank. Marcus smiled proudly at his daughter's insight, recognizing in her suggestion a refinement that would indeed improve the corridor design. Victoria watched the exchange with fascination, noting how Marcus encouraged Lily's contributions while maintaining the meeting's professional focus. As the afternoon progressed, the consultation evolved from a formal business presentation into a collaborative planning session. Victoria's strategic thinking complemented Marcus's environmental expertise, while Lily's fresh perspective provided insights that neither adult had considered. The dynamic felt natural and productive, suggesting possibilities for partnership that went far beyond a single consulting contract. "I'd like to move forward with a comprehensive environmental assessment based on your recommendations," Victoria said as the meeting concluded. "The timeline will be aggressive, but your preliminary work suggests we can achieve our development goals while actually improving the local ecological situation." Marcus accepted the project with professional satisfaction and personal anticipation for the extended collaboration it would provide. The work would require several weeks of intensive field research, followed by detailed analysis and report preparation that would involve regular meetings with Victoria and her development team. More significantly, the consulting contract would create legitimate opportunities for Marcus and Victoria to spend time together while pursuing shared objectives that mattered to both of them. The environmental assessment would showcase Marcus's expertise while advancing Victoria's strategic vision for sustainable manufacturing, creating a professional foundation that could support whatever personal relationship might develop between them. As they prepared to leave Sterling Dynamics headquarters, Victoria surprised both Marcus and herself by suggesting dinner to continue their discussion of the project timeline and logistics. "There's an excellent restaurant near here that would be perfect for working through the details," she said, hoping her invitation sounded appropriately business-focused rather than personal. Marcus accepted immediately, recognizing the suggestion as an opportunity to extend their time together while maintaining the professional context that made their interaction feel appropriate and purposeful. Lily clapped her hands with delight at the prospect of dinner in a fancy restaurant, completely unaware of the undercurrents of attraction and possibility that were complicating the adults' careful attempts to maintain proper boundaries. The restaurant Victoria had chosen was indeed perfect for business discussions, offering private booths and sophisticated ambience without the stuffiness that might intimidate an 8-year-old. Over appetizers and wine for the adults, ginger ale for Lily, their conversation gradually shifted from strictly professional topics to more personal territory. Victoria found herself sharing her vision for Sterling Dynamics' future, describing her commitment to transforming the company from a traditional manufacturer into a leader in sustainable industrial practices. The passion in her voice when she discussed environmental responsibility impressed Marcus, revealing aspects of her character that contradicted her reputation as someone motivated purely by profit maximization. "Most people assume that environmental protection and business success are mutually exclusive," Victoria said, unconsciously echoing themes from Marcus's presentation earlier. "But I've come to believe that the most sustainable businesses will be those that work with natural systems rather than against them." Marcus recognized in her comments a philosophy that aligned closely with his own approach to conservation work. Too many environmental advocates, he had observed, viewed industrial development as inherently destructive, while too many business leaders dismissed environmental concerns as obstacles to progress. Victoria's commitment to finding integrated solutions suggested possibilities for collaboration that could advance both conservation and economic objectives. Lily contributed to the dinner conversation with observations about the animals they had encountered during the morning's site survey, her detailed descriptions revealing remarkable powers of observation and genuine empathy for wildlife. Her excitement about participating in real environmental detective work charmed both adults while reinforcing the family bond that Marcus treasured above all other aspects of his life. As the evening progressed, Victoria found herself increasingly drawn to the dynamic between Marcus and Lily. Their relationship combined genuine affection with intellectual partnership, as Marcus consistently treated his daughter as a capable contributor rather than simply an adorable accessory. Lily's obvious confidence and security reflected parenting that prioritized her development and happiness without sacrificing appropriate boundaries or expectations. The contrast with Victoria's own childhood was striking. Her parents had been loving but distant, focused on academic achievement and professional preparation in ways that left little room for the kind of exploratory learning and emotional connection she was witnessing between Marcus and Lily. She began to understand how different her life might have been with parents who valued curiosity and relationship as highly as they valued accomplishment and success. When they finally parted ways in the restaurant parking lot, Victoria felt reluctant to end an evening that had been both professionally productive and personally satisfying. The consulting project would provide future opportunities for interaction, but she found herself wanting to maintain the connection that had developed through their shared dinner conversation. "Lily, would you be interested in visiting Sterling Dynamics sometime to see how manufacturing works?" Victoria asked impulsively. "We're developing some new sustainable technologies that might interest a future environmental scientist." Lily's enthusiastic response delighted Victoria while creating another opportunity for the three of them to spend time together. Marcus appreciated Victoria's genuine interest in his daughter's education and development, recognizing in the invitation evidence of the thoughtfulness and generosity that were becoming increasingly apparent beneath Victoria's professional exterior. As Victoria drove home that evening, she reflected on the unexpected turn her week had taken. What had begun as a routine regulatory requirement had evolved into a collaboration that engaged both her professional expertise and personal interests. Working with Marcus felt different from her usual business relationships, characterized by mutual respect and shared values rather than the competitive dynamics that typically defined her corporate interactions. More importantly, the consulting project would allow her to contribute meaningfully to environmental protection while advancing Sterling Dynamics' strategic objectives. The integration of personal values with professional responsibilities felt both natural and deeply satisfying, suggesting possibilities for a more fulfilling approach to business leadership. Marcus spent his evening helping Lily organize her notes from their site survey, while privately marveling at the coincidence that had brought Victoria Sterling into their professional sphere. The consulting contract would provide excellent income and valuable experience, but more significantly, it would create a framework for developing their personal relationship without the complications that might arise from purely social interaction. The environmental assessment would showcase his expertise while advancing conservation objectives that mattered deeply to him. Working with a client who genuinely understood and appreciated both the scientific complexity and practical importance of his work felt like a rare opportunity to make meaningful contributions to both environmental protection and sustainable development. As he tucked Lily into bed that night, she peppered him with excited questions about their upcoming work with Victoria and Sterling Dynamics. Her obvious affection for Victoria pleased Marcus, partly because Lily was typically cautious about forming attachments to adults outside their family circle, but primarily because he trusted his daughter's intuitive judgment about people's character and motivations. "I think Miss Victoria is going to be really good at protecting animals while building her factory," Lily announced with the confidence of someone who had carefully observed both adults throughout the day. "She listens to your ideas, and she asks smart questions, and she really wants to do the right thing." Marcus agreed with his daughter's assessment, recognizing in Victoria's approach to the Collierville project evidence of the integrity and collaborative spirit that were increasingly attractive to him both professionally and personally. The coming weeks would provide opportunities to explore whether their apparent compatibility extended beyond shared environmental concerns to deeper personal connection. Neither Marcus nor Victoria realized that their growing professional partnership and personal attraction were about to be tested by complications that would force them to confront the realities of integrating their vastly different worlds and life experiences. The foundation for their relationship had been established through mutual respect and shared values, but the next phase would reveal whether those positive feelings could survive the pressures of conflicting priorities and external expectations that would challenge everything they thought they knew about each other. The Memphis Business Journal's headline blazed across Victoria's phone screen as she stepped out of her morning shower, the words hitting her like a physical blow. "Sterling Dynamics CEO's secret: romance with environmental consultant raises conflict of interest questions." The accompanying photograph showed her and Marcus leaving the restaurant together 3 nights earlier, with Lily's small figure visible between them, the image cropped and captioned to suggest impropriety rather than the professional dinner it had actually been. Victoria's hands trembled as she scrolled through the article, her worst fears materializing in print as unnamed sources questioned whether her personal relationship with Marcus Thompson had influenced Sterling Dynamics' selection of his consulting firm for the Collierville environmental assessment. The reporter had somehow obtained details about the zoo rescue incident, weaving together a narrative that painted Victoria as a manipulative executive who had orchestrated their meeting to gain favorable environmental evaluations for her development projects. The timing couldn't have been worse. Sterling Dynamics' board meeting was scheduled for that afternoon, where Victoria had planned to present the Collierville project timeline based on Marcus's preliminary recommendations. Several board members had already expressed concerns about the aggressive expansion schedule, and this scandal would provide ammunition for those who questioned her leadership and decision-making abilities. Within hours, the story had been picked up by financial news networks and business blogs across the Southeast. Social media erupted with speculation and criticism, much of it focusing on Victoria's reputation as a ruthless executive who would exploit any advantage to advance her corporate agenda. The hashtag AlligatorGate began trending on Twitter, accompanied by memes and jokes that trivialized both the genuine danger of the zoo incident and the professional integrity of the environmental assessment process. Marcus discovered the brewing scandal when his phone began ringing incessantly at 6 in the morning. Reporters seeking comment on his relationship with Victoria Sterling and the circumstances surrounding his selection as the Collierville project consultant. He had been preparing breakfast for Lily and reviewing field notes from yesterday's site survey when the first call came, followed by a rapid succession of increasingly aggressive inquiries from journalists who seemed more interested in creating controversy than understanding the facts. The questions were invasive and accusatory, implying that Marcus had leveraged his heroic rescue of Victoria to secure lucrative consulting contracts that he wasn't qualified to handle. Several reporters suggested that his military background and wildlife expertise were insufficient credentials for the complex environmental assessment required by the Collierville project, despite his extensive track record and sterling reputation among regulatory agencies and conservation organizations. Most disturbing were the insinuations about his motivations and character. One particularly aggressive journalist from a Nashville television station suggested that Marcus had deliberately positioned himself to meet wealthy women who might become benefactors for his struggling consulting business. The implication that he would exploit Lily's presence to appear more sympathetic and trustworthy to potential clients filled Marcus with a rage that he struggled to control while maintaining professional composure. Lily witnessed her father's increasing tension and confusion as he fielded call after call, his usual calm demeanor replaced by tight-lipped responses to questions she didn't understand, but recognized as hostile. When Marcus finally turned off his phone and sat heavily at their kitchen table, she approached with the concerned expression of a child who understood that something was seriously wrong in their carefully ordered world. "Daddy, why are people calling you so early?" she asked, climbing into his lap with the unconscious trust that had always been her response to uncertainty. "Are you in trouble?" Marcus held his daughter close, struggling to find age-appropriate explanations for the fauna media frenzy that was threatening to destroy both his professional reputation and his growing relationship with Victoria. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that adults sometimes created ugly stories about good people, or that helping someone in danger could somehow be twisted into evidence of ulterior motives? "Some people are confused about Miss Victoria and me working together," he said finally, choosing his words carefully to avoid frightening Lily while acknowledging the seriousness of their situation. "They think there might be problems with me helping her company with their environmental work." Lily's expression grew indignant with the fierce protectiveness she had inherited from both her parents. "That's stupid, Daddy. You help animals and make sure companies don't hurt them. Miss Victoria wants to protect animals too. Why would that be a problem?" Her innocent logic highlighted the absurdity of the accusations, but Marcus knew that public scandals rarely responded to rational analysis or common sense. The perception of impropriety could be as damaging as actual wrongdoing, particularly in the highly regulated world of environmental consulting, where objectivity and independence were crucial to credibility. By mid-morning, Marcus had received calls from 3 different regulatory agencies requesting clarification about his relationship with Sterling Dynamics and the circumstances surrounding his consulting contract. While the inquiries were professionally courteous, their mere existence suggested that his reputation and future career prospects were now in jeopardy because of his association with Victoria. The Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, which had originally recommended Marcus for the Collierville assessment, left a voicemail requesting a meeting to discuss recent developments that may affect the consultant selection process. The implications were clear. Marcus might be removed from the project to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest, regardless of his qualifications or the quality of his preliminary work. Victoria spent her morning in crisis management mode, working with her public relations team to craft responses that would minimize damage to both Sterling Dynamics and Marcus's reputation. The challenge was defending their professional relationship without providing additional fodder for media. Speculation about their personal connection, a delicate balance that required careful consideration of every word and gesture. Her legal team advised immediate termination of Marcus's consulting contract to demonstrate Sterling Dynamics' commitment to ethical business practices and regulatory compliance. The recommendation made strategic sense from a corporate perspective. But Victoria found herself reluctant to sacrifice Marcus's career and their developing relationship to protect her own reputation and business interests. The board meeting that afternoon proved to be every bit as challenging as Victoria had anticipated. Several members had arrived armed with printed copies of the morning's news coverage, their expressions ranging from disappointed to openly hostile as they questioned Victoria's judgment and decision-making process regarding the Collierville project. Board Chairman Robert Henley, a silver-haired veteran of numerous corporate scandals, opened the discussion with barely concealed irritation. "Victoria, I think we all understand the importance of environmental compliance for the Collierville expansion, but these allegations about your relationship with the consultant are creating serious problems for the company's reputation and regulatory standing." Victoria had prepared extensively for this confrontation, armed with documentation of Marcus's qualifications and the transparent process that had led to his selection as the recommended consultant. She presented his credentials methodically, emphasizing his unique combination of military training, wildlife expertise, and proven track record with similar projects throughout the Southeast. Mr. Thompson was recommended by the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation based solely on his professional qualifications, she explained, distributing copies of the original recommendation letter and Marcus's extensive portfolio of successful consulting projects. His preliminary assessment demonstrates exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need to achieve our sustainability objectives while maintaining regulatory compliance. Board member Catherine Walsh, a sharp-eyed attorney who had consistently supported Victoria's leadership, raised the obvious question that everyone was thinking, but reluctant to voice directly. "The professional qualifications aren't in dispute, Victoria, but the perception of impropriety created by your personal relationship with Thompson could compromise the entire project, regardless of the quality of his work." Victoria felt trapped between competing loyalties and obligations. Defending Marcus meant acknowledging their personal connection, which would fuel additional speculation and criticism. But allowing him to be sacrificed to protect Sterling Dynamics felt like a betrayal of both his professional integrity and the values she had claimed to embrace during their dinner conversation about environmental responsibility and ethical business practices. The discussion continued for over 2 hours, with board members expressing concerns about shareholder reactions, regulatory scrutiny, and the potential impact on Sterling Dynamics' reputation in the business community. Several members suggested that the safest course of action would be to terminate Marcus's contract immediately and select an alternative consultant with no personal connections to company leadership. Victoria found herself fighting for Marcus's involvement with an intensity that surprised even her, recognizing that her defense of his consulting contract had become inextricably linked to her defense of their relationship and her own integrity as a leader. The realization that she was willing to risk her professional reputation to protect Marcus marked a fundamental shift in her priorities that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. "I understand the board's concerns about perception," And regulatory compliance, Victoria said finally, her voice carrying the authoritative tone that had commanded boardrooms for years. But removing Mr. Thompson from this project would be a mistake that compromises both our environmental objectives and our commitment to merit-based decision-making. His preliminary work has already identified solutions that will save the company millions of dollars while exceeding regulatory requirements. The vote to retain Marcus as the Collierville consultant passed by the narrowest possible margin, with several board members expressing reservations about the decision and demanding additional oversight measures to ensure complete transparency throughout the assessment process. Victoria had won the immediate battle, but she understood that her leadership authority had been significantly weakened by the controversy. Meanwhile, Marcus was facing his own professional crisis as conservation organizations and regulatory agencies distanced themselves from the scandal surrounding his Sterling Dynamics contract. 3 different environmental groups that had previously praised his work issued carefully worded statements expressing concern about conflicts of interest in corporate consulting relationships, effectively undermining his credibility within the conservation community he had spent years building relationships with. The Memphis Zoo, where Marcus served on the Conservation Advisory Board and had been scheduled to lead a series of educational programs, postponed his upcoming presentations indefinitely pending clarification of recent allegations. The cancellation was particularly painful because it affected his ability to contribute to wildlife education programs that had been among his most satisfying professional activities. Most devastating was the call from Dr. Sarah Mitchell, director of the Tennessee Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, where Marcus had volunteered countless hours treating injured animals and training other wildlife specialists. Dr. Mitchell's voice was strained with regret as she explained that the center's board had voted to suspend Marcus's volunteer privileges until the ethics investigation surrounding his consulting practices was resolved. "Marcus, you know how much we value your contributions," Dr. Mitchell said, her personal affection evident despite the professional necessity of the decision. "But we receive significant government funding that could be jeopardized by any perception that our volunteers are involved in questionable business relationships. I'm sorry, but we have to protect the center's ability to continue our wildlife rehabilitation mission." The conversation left Marcus feeling more isolated and professionally vulnerable than at any time since Sarah's death. The wildlife conservation community had become his primary source of identity and purpose after leaving the military, and the prospect of being excluded from that world because of unfounded accusations felt like a devastating personal loss. Lily sensed her father's growing distress throughout the day, observing his unusually quiet demeanor and the way he stared at his phone as if expecting more bad news with each incoming call. When she asked if they would still be working with Miss Victoria on the Animal Protection Project, Marcus struggled to provide reassurances he wasn't sure he could keep. "I don't know, sweetheart," he admitted, unable to maintain the confident facade he typically presented to shield Lily from adult worries and complications. "Some people think there might be problems with me working for Miss Victoria's company, even though we haven't done anything wrong." Lily's response revealed the sophisticated moral reasoning that consistently amazed Marcus and reminded him of her mother's unwavering sense of justice. "If you didn't do anything wrong, then people should believe you," she declared with the certainty of someone whose world still operated according to clear principles of fairness and truth. The afternoon brought additional challenges as several of Marcus's long-term consulting clients called to express concerns about their ongoing projects and the potential impact of the Sterling Dynamics controversy on their own reputations. 2 smaller environmental consulting contracts were terminated immediately, with clients citing the need to avoid any association with the scandal while regulatory investigations were pending. The financial implications were serious but manageable. In the short term, Marcus had always maintained conservative spending habits and sufficient savings to weather temporary income disruptions. But the damage to his professional reputation could have long-lasting consequences that would affect his ability to secure future contracts and maintain the consulting business that supported his family. More troubling was the personal toll of being portrayed as an opportunistic manipulator who would exploit dramatic circumstances for professional gain. Marcus had built his post-military identity around service to others and protection of vulnerable wildlife populations, values that directly contradicted the mercenary motivations attributed to him by media coverage and public speculation. The evening news coverage proved even more damaging than the morning's newspaper articles. A Nashville television station had assembled a panel of business, ethics experts, and environmental advocates who discussed the Sterling Dynamics scandal with barely concealed hostility toward both Victoria and Marcus. The experts questioned whether Marcus possessed adequate qualifications for complex environmental assessments, suggesting that his military background and wildlife experience were insufficient preparation for the technical and regulatory challenges involved in industrial development projects. One panelist, identified as a former regulatory official, implied that Marcus had deliberately cultivated his relationship with Victoria to secure consulting contracts that more qualified environmental engineers should have received. The accusation that he was taking work away from better credentialed professionals struck at Marcus's deepest insecurities about his non-traditional background and self-taught expertise in environmental science. Victoria watched the news coverage from her downtown penthouse, feeling increasingly responsible for the damage being inflicted on Marcus's reputation and career. Her decision to pursue both a professional and personal relationship with him had created the conflicts of interest that were now being exploited by critics and competitors who resented her success and influence in the Memphis business community. The irony was particularly bitter because Marcus's preliminary work on the Collierville project had exceeded all expectations, identifying innovative solutions that would advance both environmental protection and Sterling Dynamics sustainability objectives. His recommendations were scientifically sound, economically feasible, and environmentally responsible, yet the quality of his professional contributions was being overshadowed by speculation about his personal motivations and relationships. As she prepared for bed that night, Victoria found herself questioning whether continuing her relationship with Marcus was worth the professional and personal costs it was imposing on both of them. The scandal threatened not only their individual careers, but also the environmental initiatives they both cared about deeply, creating a situation where their connection might actually undermine the conservation objectives that had originally brought them together. The next morning brought fresh revelations that escalated the controversy to new levels of complexity and danger. An investigative reporter for a regional business magazine had uncovered financial records suggesting that Sterling Dynamics had awarded Marcus's consulting contract through a non-competitive selection process that bypassed normal procurement procedures designed to ensure fair evaluation of vendor qualifications. The article revealed that Victoria had personally approved Marcus's contract within hours of receiving the regulatory agency's recommendation, without soliciting alternative bids or conducting the comprehensive vendor evaluation process typically required for consulting contracts of comparable size and scope. While the expedited approval had been motivated by project timeline pressures rather than personal favoritism, the appearance of preferential treatment provided additional ammunition for critics who questioned Victoria's judgment and ethical standards. More damaging was the revelation that Sterling Dynamics' legal team had initially recommended against hiring Marcus because of potential conflicts of interest arising from his personal relationship with Victoria. Internal emails obtained by the reporter showed that company attorneys had specifically warned about the regulatory and reputational risks associated with the consultant selection, recommendations that Victoria had apparently ignored in her decision to proceed with Marcus's contract. The story quoted unnamed Sterling Dynamics employees who expressed concern about Victoria's decision-making process and the potential impact on the company's regulatory relationships and business reputation. The anonymous sources suggested that other executives had been excluded from discussions about the Collierville consultant selection, creating an appearance that Victoria had deliberately circumvented normal oversight procedures to benefit Marcus professionally. Marcus learned about the new revelations when reporters began calling before sunrise, seeking comment on allegations that he had received preferential treatment in the consultant selection process. The questions were more aggressive than previous inquiries, with journalists suggesting that his relationship with Victoria had corrupted the competitive bidding process and disadvantaged more qualified consulting firms. The accusation that he had somehow cheated other consultants out of legitimate opportunities felt particularly unfair because Marcus had never solicited the Sterling Dynamics contract or even known about the project until Patricia Hayes contacted him with the regulatory agency's recommendation. His involvement had been initiated entirely by outside parties who recognized his qualifications and expertise, yet the media narrative portrayed him as an opportunistic manipulator who had leveraged personal relationships for professional gain. The financial markets responded predictably to the escalating scandal, with Sterling Dynamics stock price declining steadily throughout the morning as investors expressed concern about the company's governance and regulatory compliance. Business analysts questioned whether Victoria's leadership had been compromised by personal relationships that interfered with objective decision-making, speculations that threatened the confidence that had driven Sterling Dynamics' remarkable growth and market performance. By noon, 3 separate ethics complaints had been filed against Marcus with professional organizations and regulatory agencies, alleging violations of conflict of interest rules and professional conduct standards. While the complaints were based largely on media speculation rather than documented evidence of wrongdoing, they triggered formal investigation processes that would further damage Marcus's reputation and ability to secure future consulting contracts. The Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation announced that it was reviewing all pending consultant recommendations to ensure compliance with procurement regulations and conflict of interest policies. The review would delay not only the Collierville project, but also numerous other environmental assessments throughout the state, creating regulatory uncertainty that affected dozens of development projects and conservation initiatives. Victoria found herself facing the most serious leadership crisis of her career, with board members, shareholders, and regulatory officials all questioning her judgment and demanding explanations for decisions that had seemed straightforward and appropriate when made. The woman who had built her reputation on strategic thinking and careful risk management was being portrayed as someone whose personal interests had compromised her professional responsibilities. The crisis deepened when Robert Henley called an emergency board meeting for that afternoon, his tone suggesting that Victoria's position as CEO might be in jeopardy if she couldn't provide satisfactory explanations for the consultant selection process and its aftermath. The prospect of losing her leadership role at Sterling Dynamics represented not just personal and professional devastation, but also the potential destruction of all the environmental initiatives she had worked to implement. As Victoria prepared for what might be her final board meeting as CEO, she reflected on the choices that had led to this moment of reckoning. Her relationship with Marcus had begun with a dramatic rescue that revealed his character and capabilities, progressed through genuine connection and mutual respect, and developed into both personal attraction and professional partnership that seemed to offer possibilities for meaningful collaboration on issues they both cared about deeply. Now that same relationship threatened to destroy everything they had both worked to achieve, creating a situation where their connection might actually undermine the environmental protection and conservation objectives that had originally drawn them together. The scandal had revealed how quickly private relationships could become public controversies, and how personal choices could have far-reaching consequences for professional reputations and career prospects. Marcus spent the day consulting with attorneys about the ethics complaints and media coverage. Learning that the damage to his reputation might persist long after the immediate controversy subsided. Even if formal investigations eventually cleared him of wrongdoing, the association with scandal and conflict of interest allegations would likely shadow his career for years, affecting his ability to secure consultant contracts and maintain credibility within the conservation community. The personal toll was becoming as significant as the professional consequences, as Marcus struggled to maintain optimism and confidence while facing unprecedented attacks on his integrity and motivations. The values and principles that had guided his transition from military service to wildlife conservation were being systematically undermined by critics who questioned his competence, ethics, and character. Most painfully, the scandal was affecting Lily's daily life, as news coverage made their family situation a subject of public speculation and judgment. Several parents at Lily's school had made inappropriate comments about Marcus's relationship with Victoria, creating social awkwardness that threatened to impact his daughter's friendships and sense of security. As evening approached, both Victoria and Marcus faced the growing realization that their relationship might not survive the external pressures and professional consequences that were mounting with each passing hour. The connection that had begun with heroism and developed through genuine compatibility was being tested by forces beyond their control, challenging everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the possibility of building a life together despite their different worlds and circumstances. Victoria Sterling stood before the emergency board meeting with the calm determination of someone who had made peace with potentially losing everything she had spent years building. The conference room felt smaller than usual, filled with the tension of directors who had arrived armed with questions she might not be able to answer satisfactorily. But as she looked around the mahogany table at faces ranging from sympathetic to openly hostile, Victoria realized something fundamental had shifted in her priorities during the past week of crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to address the allegations surrounding the Collierville project consultant selection directly. Victoria began, her voice carrying the authority that had commanded respect throughout her career. But first, I need to share information that will put these accusations in proper context. She activated the conference room's presentation system, displaying a comprehensive analysis that her team had worked through the night to compile. The first slide showed Marcus Thompson's qualifications alongside those of 5 other environmental consultants who might have been considered for the Collierville assessment, with detailed comparisons of education, experience, and track record on similar projects. Mr. Thompson's credentials exceed those of every other consultant who is available within our project timeline, Victoria explained methodically. His military engineering background, combined with 15 years of hands-on wildlife management experience, made him uniquely qualified for a project involving both complex environmental systems and industrial development constraints. Board member Catherine Walsh leaned forward with interest as Victoria presented documentation of Marcus's previous work, including testimonials from federal agencies and conservation organizations that contradicted media suggestions about his competence and integrity. The evidence painted a picture of a highly respected professional whose expertise had been systematically misrepresented by reporters seeking to create controversy. The Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation specifically recommended Mr. Thompson because of his successful track record with similar projects. Victoria continued, displaying the original recommendation letter with its detailed justification for the consultant selection. Our decision to accept their recommendation was based entirely on his professional qualifications, not on any personal relationship. Robert Henley, the board chairman, interrupted with the question. Everyone was thinking, Victoria, the professional qualifications aren't disputed, but the perception of impropriety created by your personal relationship with Thompson has damaged our reputation and regulatory standing. How do you propose to address that reality? Victoria paused, knowing that her next words would determine not only her future as CEO, but also the direction of her life beyond Sterling Dynamics. She had spent the sleepless hours before the meeting weighing options and consequences, arriving at a clarity that surprised her with its certainty and peace. "You're absolutely right that perception matters as much as reality in business relationships," she said calmly. "Which is why I'm prepared to take full responsibility for any errors in judgment, and to implement whatever measures the board deems necessary to restore confidence in our corporate governance." The room fell silent as directors processed the implications of Victoria's statement. Several had arrived expecting her to fight desperately to maintain her position, while others had anticipated defensive justifications for decisions they considered questionable. Instead, Victoria was demonstrating the kind of principled leadership that had originally earned their respect and trust. "However," Victoria continued, "I believe the board should have all relevant information before making decisions that will affect Sterling Dynamics' future environmental initiatives and regulatory relationships." She clicked to the next slide, revealing preliminary results from Marcus's Collierville assessment that exceeded every expectation for environmental protection, while maintaining the project's economic viability. His innovative solutions would reduce long-term operational costs by 30%, while creating habitat enhancements that would actually improve local ecosystems. Mr. Thompson's work demonstrates exactly why he was recommended by regulatory agencies, Victoria explained as directors studied the impressive data. His environmental engineering proposals will make the Collierville facility a model for sustainable manufacturing that other companies will seek to replicate. The presentation continued with detailed analysis of how Marcus's recommendations would position Sterling Dynamics as an industry leader in environmental responsibility, generating positive publicity and regulatory goodwill that would benefit the company for years. The irony was unmistakable. The consultant whose selection had created controversy was producing results that would enhance Sterling Dynamics' reputation more than any public relations campaign. Board member David Chun, who had initially expressed strong concerns about the consultant selection process, raised his hand thoughtfully. "Victoria, this work is undeniably impressive. But how do we proceed when the consultant's involvement has become a liability regardless of his capabilities?" Victoria had anticipated the question and prepared for this moment of truth. "The board has several options," she said evenly. "We can terminate Mr. Thompson's contract to minimize ongoing controversy, though that would delay the project by months while we locate alternative expertise. We can continue with the current arrangement while implementing additional oversight measures to ensure complete transparency." She paused, meeting each director's gaze directly. "Or the board can accept my resignation as CEO, which would eliminate the personal relationship that has created perception problems while allowing Sterling Dynamics to benefit from Mr. Thompson's exceptional professional contributions." The offer to resign sent shockwaves through the room. Victoria Sterling had built Sterling Dynamics from a struggling family business into a billion-dollar corporation through determination and strategic vision that board members had consistently admired. Her voluntary departure would resolve the immediate crisis, but potentially sacrifice the leadership that had driven the company's remarkable success. Catherine Walsh spoke first, her voice reflecting the complexity of emotions throughout the room. "Victoria, your leadership has been exemplary for 8 years. The board isn't interested in sacrificing proven competence because of media speculation and unfounded allegations." Other directors nodded agreement, recognizing that Victoria's offer to resign demonstrated the integrity and accountability they valued in effective leadership. Rather than attempting to deflect blame or minimize responsibility, she was prepared to accept consequences that would protect both the company's reputation and Marcus's professional future. "What if we implement a comprehensive transparency protocol for the remainder of the Collierville project?" Suggested board member Margaret Torres. Independent oversight, regular progress reports, additional documentation of all decisions and recommendations. We maintain the benefits of Thompson's expertise while demonstrating our commitment to ethical business practices. The proposal generated immediate discussion as directors recognized a path forward that would address perception issues without sacrificing either Victoria's leadership or Marcus's valuable contributions. The enhanced oversight would actually strengthen Sterling Dynamics' environmental compliance procedures, creating systems that would benefit future projects and regulatory relationships. After 2 hours of debate and analysis, the board voted unanimously to retain both Victoria as CEO and Marcus as the Collierville consultant, subject to transparency measures that would document every aspect of the project and ensure compliance with all ethical guidelines. Victoria felt profound relief and gratitude for the director's confidence, while also recognizing that their decision would allow her relationship with Marcus to continue developing without compromising either of their careers. Meanwhile, Marcus was meeting with attorneys and conservation colleagues who had spent the morning investigating the sources of media allegations and ethics complaints that had threatened his professional reputation. Their research had revealed a coordinated campaign by competing consulting firms who resented his success and sought to eliminate a rival they considered unqualified for high-profile environmental assessments. Dr. Patricia Williams, director of the Southeast Environmental Consulting Association, presented evidence that 3 separate firms had provided information to reporters and filed ethics complaints designed to damage Marcus's credibility and eliminate his participation in lucrative government and corporate contracts. Marcus, this was never about your relationship with Victoria Sterling or conflicts of interest, Dr. Williams explained as she reviewed documentation of the coordinated attacks. Your competitors recognized that your innovative approaches and successful track record were threatening their market position, so they manufactured a scandal to discredit your work and eliminate your influence. The revelation transformed Marcus's understanding of the crisis that had threatened to destroy his career and relationship. Rather than legitimate concerns about ethical standards, the accusations had been strategically orchestrated by business rivals who couldn't compete with his expertise and results. The media had unwittingly participated in a commercial dispute disguised as an ethics investigation. The Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation has reviewed all the allegations and found no evidence of improper conduct, Dr. Williams continued. In fact, they're so impressed with your preliminary Collierville work that they want to use your recommendations as a template for future industrial development assessments. The complete vindication felt almost surreal after days of watching his reputation systematically destroyed by critics and competitors. Marcus had expected that clearing his name would require months of investigation and legal proceedings, but the evidence of coordinated attacks had actually strengthened his standing with regulatory agencies and conservation organizations. That afternoon, Marcus received calls from 3 different wildlife rehabilitation centers, requesting his immediate involvement in high-priority projects that had been delayed while alternatives were considered. The Memphis Zoo invited him to resume his conservation advisory role and expand his educational programming. Most significantly, 2 universities approached him about teaching positions that would allow him to share his expertise with the next generation of environmental professionals. The professional rehabilitation was gratifying, but Marcus's primary concern remained his relationship with Victoria and the impact that continued scandal might have on her leadership position at Sterling Dynamics. He had been prepared to withdraw from the Collierville project if his involvement threatened Victoria's career, recognizing that her environmental initiatives could benefit far more wildlife than his individual consulting contracts. When Victoria called that evening with news of the board's decision to retain both of them while implementing enhanced oversight procedures, Marcus felt overwhelming relief and gratitude for her willingness to fight for their professional partnership. despite personal and corporate costs. The board recognized that your work is exceptional and that the accusations were unfounded, Victoria explained as they met for dinner at a quiet restaurant away from downtown Memphis. More importantly, they understood that sacrificing competence to appease critics would damage Sterling Dynamics' environmental objectives and regulatory relationships. Marcus reached across the table to take her hand, marveling at the strength and determination she had demonstrated throughout the crisis. I was prepared to withdraw from the project if my involvement was damaging your position, he said quietly. Your environmental initiatives are more important than any single consulting contract. Victoria's eyes softened as she recognized the selflessness behind Marcus's offer, the same character that had motivated his rescue of her from the alligator pool and his willingness to risk everything for people and principles he believed in. That's exactly why the board made the right decision, she replied. Integrity and competence shouldn't be sacrificed because of manufactured controversies and competitive jealousy. Lily had been staying with Marcus's sister during the most intense media coverage, but she returned home that weekend with excited questions about their work and plans for the Collierville project. Her uncomplicated enthusiasm for environmental protection and wildlife conservation reminded both adults why their collaboration mattered beyond personal and professional considerations. Are we still going to build the animal corridors and clean water systems? Lily asked as they reviewed updated plans for the Collierville facility. The otters are going to need safe places to swim when the factory is finished. Marcus smiled at his daughter's priorities, recognizing in her concern for wildlife the values that had originally drawn him to conservation work and attracted him to Victoria's commitment to sustainable business practices. We're definitely going to protect the otters and all the other animals, he assured her. Miss Victoria and I are going to make sure the factory helps the environment instead of hurting it. The Collierville project proceeded over the following months with unprecedented transparency and documentation that satisfied regulatory agencies while producing environmental outcomes that exceeded all expectations. Marcus's innovative solutions were implemented exactly as designed, creating a manufacturing facility that actually enhanced local ecosystems while achieving Sterling Dynamics production objectives. The success generated positive publicity that overshadowed the earlier scandal, with environmental organizations and business publications praising the collaboration between Victoria's strategic vision and Marcus's technical expertise. The facility became a model for sustainable industrial development that attracted visitors from around the world and established both Sterling Dynamics and Marcus's consulting firm as leaders in environmental innovation. More importantly, the professional partnership had deepened into personal commitment that enriched all their lives in ways they hadn't anticipated. Victoria's relationship with Lily had evolved from polite interest to genuine maternal affection, while Marcus had brought stability and adventure to Victoria's previously isolated existence. On a warm spring evening, exactly 1 year after the alligator rescue, Marcus proposed to Victoria at the Memphis Zoo's renovated Bayou Adventures exhibit, with Lily serving as official photographer and Boudreaux, the alligator, unknowingly providing the backdrop for their engagement. The setting was perfect for a couple whose love story had begun with danger and developed through shared commitment to protecting the natural world. Their wedding 6 months later was held at the Collierville facility they had designed together, surrounded by the constructed wetlands and wildlife corridors that represented their collaborative achievement. Environmental colleagues and Sterling Dynamics employees celebrated alongside family members, recognizing a partnership that had overcome external pressures to create something greater than either could have accomplished alone. Lily served as maid of honor, her speech praising Daddy and Victoria for showing her that families could grow and change while staying true to the values that mattered most. Her innocent wisdom captured the essence of a love story that had begun with heroism and matured through trials that tested their commitment to each other and the principles they shared. Victoria kept her maiden name professionally while embracing her role as Marcus's wife and Lily's stepmother, finding in their blended family the personal fulfillment that had been missing from her previous focus on corporate achievement. She maintained her leadership of Sterling Dynamics while expanding the company's environmental initiatives to include wildlife conservation programs that Marcus helped design and implement. Marcus expanded his consulting practice into a full environmental services firm that employed dozens of specialists and handled projects throughout the Southeast. His work with Sterling Dynamics had established his reputation as an innovator who could balance environmental protection with economic development, leading to opportunities that allowed him to impact conservation efforts on a regional scale. The Memphis Zoo honored both of them with conservation awards, recognizing their contributions to wildlife protection and environmental education, a ceremony that featured Lily's presentation about sustainable manufacturing and habitat preservation. That impressed scientists and educators with its sophistication and passion. As they stood together at the ceremony, watching their daughter explain complex ecological concepts to an audience of conservation professionals, Victoria and Marcus reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them from a moment of crisis to a life of shared purpose and mutual devotion. The alligator rescue had revealed their individual characters under pressure, but the scandal and recovery had tested their ability to support each other through challenges that threatened everything they had built separately and together. Their love had survived external attacks and internal doubts, emerging stronger and more committed to both their relationship and their shared mission of environmental protection. Years later, when Lily was applying to veterinary school with plans to specialize in wildlife conservation, she would write her admissions essay about watching her father risk his life to save a stranger and learning that heroism comes in many forms. Some heroes dive into dangerous waters to rescue people in immediate peril, while others risk their careers and reputations to protect principles and relationships that matter more than safety or convenience. Victoria Sterling Thompson and Marcus Thompson had been both kinds of heroes for each other, creating a love story that began with dramatic rescue and matured through quiet daily choices to prioritize integrity, compassion, and commitment to causes greater than themselves. Their partnership had produced not only personal happiness, but also environmental innovations that protected wildlife and inspired others to find ways to balance human progress with respect for the natural world. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.